With the news at this time, I am Tiana Jordan. A very good afternoon to you. To begin the news, here's a look at the lead stories. The Alliance for Change wants the government to cushion the impact of the increase in the price of flour. The Caribbean Court of Justice orders that a murder charge against Guyana-born American Marcus Bisram stand discharged. In regional news, the Barbados government is trying to ease rising cost of living, but is taxing some big businesses. For the international news, we'll bring to you the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service. The details of these and other stories will be coming up in just a moment.
News Talk Radio Guyana is the station for you, bringing you news updates every hour, major news 3 times a day, edutainment on a higher level, shows like Beat the Clock, Brunch on the Coast, The Afternoon Jam, Youth's Perspective. It's a station that goes wherever you go, streaming online at www.bit.ly/newstalk1031. It's News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM.
And now the news in detail. The Alliance for Change, AFC, is calling on the government to subsidize the price of wheat flour. The call has been issued days after the National Milling Company announced that the price of flour will be increased by 15%. The AFC says the Treasury has sufficient money from the extra earnings due to the increase in world oil prices. In the national budget, the Guyana government has pegged its calculations at $74 per barrel. However, due to the war between Russia and Ukraine, the price is now more than $100 per barrel. Vice President Bart Jagdeo has already announced that electricity and water bills will be subsidized by the government. The Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, on Tuesday effectively ruled that murder-accused Marcus Bisram should no longer face the charge. Bisram, who is also an American citizen, had been extradited to his native Guyana in 2019 to face a charge that he had allegedly murdered Berbice Carpenter Fayez Narindat, a guest at a party he hosted back in late 2016, after the now-dead man had refused his sexual advances. A preliminary inquiry had found that the evidence had been sufficient for Bisram to be tried by a judge and jury. However, the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, had written to the magistrate requesting that Bisram be recommitted to undergo another inquiry. After a lengthy appeal and cross-appeal, the CCJ on Tuesday ruled that Bisram must not be charged again with the offense of murder unless there is fresh evidence.
The court also found that it would be unjust in all of the circumstances for Bisram to be made to answer any charge of murder in this case on the same evidence that was presented to the magistrate. However, because Bisram, at least in terms of the law, was never placed in jeopardy, nothing prevents the DPP from having him rearrested and charged again if fresh evidence was obtained linking him to the alleged murder.
CCJ President Justice Adrian Saunders also says that Guyana's DPP can no longer unilaterally commit someone who has been discharged at a preliminary inquiry. Justice Saunders says until Guyana's National Assembly amends the law, the High Court must decide if someone must be arrested and placed before the court again.
Until the National Assembly addresses this matter, Section 72 should be modified to provide that a DPP who is for good reason dissatisfied with the decision of a magistrate to discharge an accused person may place before a judge of the Supreme Court the depositions and other materials that were before the magistrate on an ex parte application for the discharged accused to be arrested and committed if the judge is of the view that the material justified such a course of action.
The CCJ also ordered that Bisram's passport be returned.
We are prepared, and we do make a further order that Mr. Bisram's passport be returned to him forthwith, unless there are any other charges on the basis of which that passport is being kept. But certainly in relation to the charge of murder, which this case is concerned about, if that passport is being kept on the basis of that charge only, then it must be returned to him.
Solicitor General Nigel Hawke and defense lawyers for Bisram have been given more time to address the issue of cost that the state will have to pay. The Guyana-Suriname ferry will not be working for 2 days beginning today. The company says the MV Kanawaima has to undergo emergency repairs on Wednesday and Thursday. The operators of the ferry service are apologizing for the inconvenience. Several months ago, the MV Kanawaima had been taken out of dry dock after extensive repairs and put back into operation. The European Union funded the purchase of the ferry and the establishment in the 1900s as part of a regional integration program. And now in regional news, Barbados's Prime Minister Mia Mottley has announced a cap on containerized imports in an effort to bring down the cost of living. Ms. Mottley, who is also Finance Minister, made the announcement in her 2022 budget speech on Monday.
The government of Barbados will partially shield consumers from the increased freight costs by capping the cost of freight used for the purpose of calculating customs duties at the pre-COVID-19 levels of $7,350 per 20-foot container and $8,000 for 40-foot containers, and we shall hold these costs for 12 months, Mr. Speaker.
After also announcing a reduction in the prices of gasoline and diesel, the Barbadian Prime Minister appeared to have clawed back in some of the revenue that have been lost to measures aimed at reducing the cost of living, and also a significant loss of tourism earnings due to the more than 2-year-long COVID-19 pandemic.
We shall introduce a one-off pandemic contribution levy on corporate profits in certain sectors. Where a company with a net income above $5 million in 2020 and 2021 is carrying on domestic business in the telecommunications sector, in the retail sale of petroleum products by dealers, in the commercial banking sector, so deposit taking and finance houses are there, but we exclude credit unions, and in general and life insurance business, then these companies shall be subject to a pandemic contribution levy of 15% of their net income per the company's financial statements for the fiscal years ending March 2021 and 2022.
Ms. Mottley says this levy is in addition to corporate taxes.
Mr. Speaker, this levy for each fiscal year is payable in addition to the company's corporation tax obligation, and it is not deductible for tax purposes. This levy will only be in place for the period up until March 2023 and represents, as I said, a one-off contribution to the over $1 billion costs that it has cost us as a nation to fight COVID.
Barbados's Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Mia Mottley. Brazil's Economy Ministry is evaluating a temporary increase of the government's Auxilia Brazil welfare program to help people deal with economic impacts stemming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The social program, which pays monthly installments of around $78 to approximately 18 million families, would be temporarily adjusted if the conflict persists and rising oil prices keep fanning inflation. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro faces an uphill re-election battle in this year's presidential election, with voters concerned by rising prices and a weak economy. The plan is currently viewed as a backup, the sources said, and has not yet been formally designed, with no defined value for any eventual increase. Reuters news agency reports that one source says the authorization of this additional benefit would depend on Brazil declaring a public emergency to make the expenses viable. Trinidad and Tobago's Director of Public Prosecutions is being asked to investigate the Prime Minister for misbehavior in public office. Both Gary Griffith and Opposition United National Congress UNC Senator David Nakid made the request after the Prime Minister's admission that he met with former Police Service Commission Chairman Bliss C. Prasad the day before the Commissioner of Police merit list was rescinded. But the Prime Minister remains defiant. CNC3's Renuka Singh has the details.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is shrugging off any suggestion that there would be negative fallout from his admission that he was the high-ranking government official who met with the former Police Service Commission chairman back in August. That meeting led to the merit list for Commissioner of Police being rescinded. The Prime Minister's admission on Monday ends months of questions and speculation, but in response to questions on the issue today, the Prime Minister said that he did nothing wrong. He asked since when is providing pertinent information to a service commission considered interference. The Prime Minister said that he did not understand the mystery surrounding the meeting, as he was the only person from the cabinet who, to his knowledge, meets at President's house. The Prime Minister said that he would never tell the POLSC what to do, but they should have all the pertinent information in order to carry out its functions. The Prime Minister said that that was his understanding of an independent commission and that his interpretation had the support of the Privy Council. But not everyone is seeing it that way. Former Police Commissioner Gary Griffith and United National Congress Senator David Nakid have already written to the Director of Public Prosecutions on this matter. Former Commissioner Griffith highlighted 9 issues to the DPP, chief among them whether the Police Service Commission had the authority to rescind the merit list given to the President. In the letter, Griffith says, quote, "We are now seeing that the Prime Minister has openly admitted to interfering with an independent process from an independent body, whether it be influencing, intimidating, directing, or coercing. It means that he interfered, which can lead to someone being charged. This must be grounds for an investigation." Griffith also says that the previous PSC chairman refused to reinsert him, even when told to do so by the majority of the PSC members. He says that this too can amount to misbehavior in public office. Meanwhile, Senator Nakid says that in light of the admission by the PM that he caused the merit list to be withdrawn, he should now be investigated for misbehavior in public office. Renuka Singh, CNC3 News.
A U.S. judge on a Tuesday rejected a bid by retired Venezuelan general to dismiss drug trafficking charges against him on the basis of foreign sovereign immunity, saying the doctrine does not apply to a rogue state. Cleaver Alcala in 2020 was charged with 4 counts of drugs and weapons crimes. U.S. prosecutors say he participated in a narco-terrorism conspiracy in which senior Venezuelan government officials conspired with the FARC Colombian rebel group to ship cocaine to the United States. Alcala's attorney, Cesar de Castro, said in Manhattan Federal Court that because Alcala was a uniformed military officer at the time of the alleged conspiracy, any action he took would have been in his official capacity and thus could not be prosecuted in the United States. U.S. District Judge Alvin Hellestein disagreed, saying that sovereign immunity does not affect a rogue state or rogue officials. He says the U.S. justice system is dealing with criminal conduct at the highest levels of government. Prosecutors said that Alcala in 2008 held a meeting with Diosdado Cabello, now a Venezuelan lawmaker from President Nicolas Maduro's Socialist Party, and agreed to coordinate drug trafficking with the FARC. Cabello and Maduro were also charged but remain in Venezuela. Alcala pleaded not guilty after surrendering to U.S. agents in Colombia. The 2020 indictment came as the Trump administration aimed to force Maduro, who Washington accuses of election rigging and rights violation, from office. Maduro and Cabello have denied accusations of drug trafficking and argue Washington is seeking to overthrow their government to control the OPEC nations' oil. Alcala retired from the military in 2013. He has since become a critic of Maduro and backed opposition leader Juan Guaido, recognized by Washington as Venezuela's rightful leader. And now for the international news. Here's the latest bulletin coming from the BBC World Service.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is about to make a rare live video address to the US Congress as Washington prepares to offer further military aid to his country. As the fighting continues in Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky is expected to appeal to the US to cross its red lines. More details from our Washington correspondent, Nomia Iqbal.
President Zelensky will be addressing lawmakers from both parties from inside his country in an undisclosed location whilst war rages around him. That is an extraordinary moment. Whether or not he can use that moment to try and change US foreign policy towards Ukraine, however, is a different question. He will be asking for fighter jets for this no-fly zone. And so, these are things that America does have red lines on. Whether or not they will cross them, that is what he will be hoping for.
Attacks by Russian forces in Ukraine have continued 3 weeks into the war, despite both sides speaking of possible compromise. In Kyiv, the emergency services said Russia had shelled a residential building. There's also been further heavy bombardment of Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv. A resident, Maria Avdeyeva, told the BBC that President Putin's forces had used cluster munitions to hit a residential area.
I just stay in front of one of the houses that was hit yesterday. It is very close to where I live. And I have heard yesterday during the day the heavy shellings, and today they continue. And this house was hit by probably what was cluster munition, the Great rocket missile system. And I have seen this, the signs of them all over the place. Also, other buildings were destroyed.
The International Committee of the Red Cross has described conditions in Mariupol as a waking nightmare. The organisation is unable to deliver aid to the city as tens of thousands of people are still trapped. The ICRC's president has arrived in Kyiv for a five-day visit to Ukraine. Peter Maurer called for better access to civilians caught up in the war, which he said was causing enormous suffering.
I hope that we can increase our assistance work in the country. I hope that we can considerably advance on some of the critical issue on the respect of international humanitarian law, that we can advance our role in the issue of prisoners, of detainees, but also of dead bodies.
Jens Stoltenberg has opened a meeting of NATO defence ministers with the declaration that the alliance is united in its support for Ukraine. NATO Secretary-General told the gathering in Brussels that member countries were providing large quantities of critical military equipment. You're listening to World News from the BBC. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has arrived in Saudi Arabia on the second leg of his visit to the Gulf. He'll be speaking to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh for discussions on how the country could help the West reduce its reliance on Russian energy. Earlier, he also met the UAE's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. The two reached agreements on increasing collaboration on energy security and green technology. In other news, a British-Iranian woman who's been detained in Iran for nearly 6 years, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, is heading home. She's accompanied by another British-Iranian, Anousheh Ashuri, who's been held for almost 5 years. Ms. Zaghari-Ratcliffe was arrested in 2016 and convicted of plotting to overthrow the Iranian government, a charge she's always denied. Gunmen in northern Nigeria have killed at least 13 police officers and self-defense vigilantes in 2 separate attacks. The authorities say gunmen were trying to abduct foreign nationals working at a factory in Kebbi State on Tuesday. Armed groups in the region frequently carry out killings and kidnappings for ransom. The BBC's Ishaq Khalid reports from Abuja.
The authorities say 3 police officers and 4 members of a self-defense vigilante group were killed by gunmen in the village of Nasco in Niger State. In another raid, armed men targeted a tomato processing factory in neighboring Kebbi State, killing 6 police officers who were guarding the facility, as well as a civilian. Attacks by armed groups have continued across northern Nigeria, despite raids and bombardments of their forest hideouts by the security forces.
A ballistic missile launched by North Korea from an airfield near Pyongyang has exploded shortly after takeoff. A monitoring website based in South Korea said photos suggest the missile's debris may have crashed in suburbs of the North Korean capital. BBC News.
And now here's a recap of the leads. The Alliance for Change wants the government to cushion the impact of the increase in the price of flour. The Caribbean Court of Justice orders that murder charge against Guyana-born American Marcus Bisram stand discharged. In regional news, the Barbados government is trying to ease rising cost of living, but is taxing some big businesses. And that's the news at the moment.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.